Hi, I'm Alexei Kovzun, and you're watching and maybe listening our conversation, which is called Ukrainian accent. That's because I'm Ukrainian, and it is therefore my accent. And now I have visiting friend Dan Sabbag from The Guardian. Hello.
Hey,
You
thank you for
write
having
about
me.
security. Yeah. It's always a pleasure, if a bit hungover, but pleasure anyway. So, you visit Ukraine every couple of months, and you write about Ukraine, you visit frontline and stuff. So you take part in shaping British politics. The press is called fourth power. Is it still that influential in the UK?
Oh, yes. I mean, the media ecology is changing, the media environment is changing everywhere, right? And we know the rise of social media, podcast, video shows like this, that the mainstream media does not have the stranglehold over public opinion or that it once had, but newspapers and tradition, big newspapers and television remain very powerful in the UK, and they absolutely shape public opinion. Television, the first, BBC in particular. But what the newspapers do, the newspapers are the ones who tend to break the stories, and it tends to be the broadcasters who follow them. And you've had a success, if you like, when you've got a story that's gone from that you've broken, and then there's been picked up by television. And I think a lot of, like every country, the political environment is shaped around, and politicians' activity is shaped around trying to get some kind of pickup or from the press or from television. The thing that's maybe interesting in the UK is that the TV stations are all, although that's changing now, but the traditional TV stations are quite regulated and are supposed to be impartial and neutral.
Unlike newspapers that can do whatever basically they like,
Exactly.
plus minus. So, you're writing about things you see in Ukraine. You did interview with Sternenko. You wrote about Azov. You very much in Ukrainian material. What is the mood in Great Britain towards Ukraine?
Right
No,
now,
yeah.
yeah. Well, I think the first thing that comes in my head is to say Donald Trump's very unpopular in the UK, which is a kind of might be quite a...
What a strange thing.
Yes.
How did it happen?
Well, and one of the reasons he's unpopular is because he seemed to be bullying Ukraine, trying to sort of potentially force Ukraine into an unjust or unfair peace. Some of the actions, the famous ambush in the Oval Office, again, the feeling was, his Zelensky is not even speaking in his first language. He's trying to be as accommodating as possible. He's basically being berated. He barely gets to it's not really a row. He gets shouted at. And when British people see these kind of things, this sort of deep-seated British notion of fairness, they can see that Ukraine is not being treated fairly. But Ukraine has been a popular cause. Supporting Ukraine has been a popular cause that's transcended left and right generally in the UK to a very high degree since the full scale, since February 22. And British people are still very interested and very supportive of Ukraine, although we all recognize British power has its limits. And although people want to see the UK supporting Ukraine, everyone knows that the US is the big dog, the strongest military in the world, and so can try to flex its muscles and see how far it can force its will on the situation.
Yeah, but it looks that we had an ally, which was US. And then they decided that they will be impartial arbiter, right? Like referee at boxing match.
Mm-hmm.
They were in our corner, and then they switched into that uniform of arbiter, and we see that they play on the other side. They exchange compliments with Putin. They speak his lingo. And it looks that we losing our biggest and ally who promised to stay with us as long as necessary. And now it seems that it's a lost cause. So our hope is Europe and UK. You guys had Brexit, you left EU.
Yeah.
So it's Europe and UK. Can we hope on you guys?
I think we can. I think the plus is you can have hope. You can have hope in the sense that both the British public and British politicians, and that's what they always do, reflect public opinion. They both want to carry on supporting Ukraine, and there is the will and the ability to do so. I think British help for the Ukraine this year will be something like £4.5 billion, which is a record. It's, a serious sum of money. And remember, in the first year of the conflict, it was 2.3 billion. So that gives you an idea of sort of how the numbers are evolving. So people are happy to see, still happy to see money being spent, still want to see Ukraine being supported, still want to see Ukraine come out of this with some degree of honor, even if I think there's now a recognition, and I'm sure there's similar in Ukraine, a recognition that there's not going to be some great victory and the Russians are going to be driven out of their territories. But, there's still a hope and belief that there's some sort of route to as fair a settlement, as can be achieved. I think the challenge and the question then becomes is the reality of hard power is there are limitations on British power and limitations on British resources. Now, as long as Britain works closely with France, with Germany, Poland,
Baltics, Nordics,
and one of the key countries, then it is possible. And at the moment, again, there's one very encouraging sign, which is Keir Starmer, newest Prime Minister, has formed a very strong relationship, with Emmanuel Macron of France, pretty similar political beliefs and values, Europe's two main military powers, and they are trying to work very closely together to try and achieve, to again carrying on supporting Ukraine. So that's a positive. Obviously, we're waiting for the new government to settle in or even start in Germany, I think technically, but Merz.
It will take some time.
But Merz also is saying the right things. And the German politicians from the SPD who are going to carry on going forward, or looks like they are, like Boris Pistorius, the currently defense minister, again, I think more temperamentally inclined to helping Ukraine than certainly Scholz was, who I think after a warm start has been something of a disappointment. So as long as Europe can stick together and hold together, the problem is Europe has a terrible track record of sticking together and holding together over a long period of time. And nothing can change the dominating reality of US military power. The US spends nearly $900 billion a year on defense. And when you add up on a purchasing power basis, as a think tank did, all of European defense spending, that roughly matches, what Russia spends, if you look at it on a which
is quite a lot.
Yes.
And
but it's not quite, it's a lot. It's enough to keep Russia at bay, but is it enough to, it's a lot less than with the Americans, let's put it like that. So you're relying on people who can definitely provide a degree of help. The question is, what's Russia traditionally been very good at? Russia's been good at breaking down, creating divisions and fissures in Europe. Look at Brexit, for example. The British decision to leave the EU was a decision predominantly of essentially the British people, but
it was some Russian money involved.
There was all discussion about potential for Russian interference, and there are one or two pro-Brexit politicians in the UK who've been more sympathetic to Putin, principally Nigel Farage, a pro-Brexit politician, for example. And so, Europe just has to stick together in this moment and be behind Ukraine, and the feeling is good. But we have some way to...
Yeah, but...
these things have to be done over the long haul.
You didn't mention the word victory, which we still hope for, and it's quite a viable hope, I think. And that's the thing that, to my mind, that what scares America, because they launched an operation of saving private Russia, because the world where Russia is breaking apart after military problems, that colonized people would remember that they didn't want to be in so-called Russia in the first place. They will remember the history of repressions and stuff. And this scares America seriously, like it was in 1991 when Soviet Union was breaking up. And I do remember that famous Chicken Kyiv speech in Ukrainian parliament, don't go out. So for from UK point of view, are you okay with Russia breaking up, or is the new reality is bothering British public and British politicians?
I don't think people see that far ahead. So I think one of the essential problems here is that unless you get regime change in Russia, it doesn't look like there's a scenario where the pressure on Ukraine is going to go away. Even if there's, let's say there is a ceasefire. We're a long way from it, but let's say there is a ceasefire. Then what? You've got 600,000 Russian troops. You've got a war. You've got a war economy. And a president who's got the same set of ideas that he always had.
Absolutely. And where they would go? Would they go home, or maybe they move somewhere?
And there's no strategy. And the truth is, there's been no strategy. There's no political strategy around this. And this is a completely different scenario to what you would have seen at the end of World War II, where ultimately, the British, the Americans, the Soviets, everyone was racing to Berlin, and it was about the conquest and division of Nazi Germany. There's no one's talking about the scenario. So the only hope, if there was a strategy in this respect, the hope was that maybe there would be some internal coup and some change of power. But if anything, I think what we've seen, particularly after the demise of Evgeny Prigozhin, was that that Putin's grip on power is stronger, not weaker. So I don't know. For me, this fundamental hasn't changed. Now, if there was a world where suddenly, there is another Russian revolution, and suddenly it looks like Russia is crumbling, then I think there would be a lot of hasty and concerned thinking in Europe, and it's hard to predict where that would go. And people would worry, in particular, about the safety of nuclear weapons. But look, I think that the history of this has been that there has been too much anxiety about in Western capitals about how Russia would react, about Russian red lines, and this was
absolutely.
And this was a major failure of the Biden administration, which didn't really push the point or really sort of endlessly, as we all know, calibrated its response in terms of weapons delivery regarding Russia. And each time there was no meaningful reaction from Moscow. And of course, Ukrainian forces invaded in Kursk. And again, where was this sort of Russian red line?
All the red lines were broken, basically.
So there's a lot of there's too much anxiety about this, and or has been too much anxiety about this, and unfortunately, the problem that we're in at the moment is we are in a position, I think, where Britain, France, Germany can support Ukraine and keep Ukraine more than viable, keep Ukraine in the game, provide Ukraine with stabilization and reassurance, and safeguard its future. But what they don't have the resources to do is to kick the Russians out of Ukrainian territory and achieve a kind of a defeat on the battlefield, and that's not happening.
It's very easy. We had a conversation. Actually, you can watch it with the Jessica Berlin, who presented that project called Sky Shield. Basically, it's to put it in simple words, it's Ukrainian skies covered from the border up to Dnipro, so on over all the territory that is held by Ukrainian army, by 100 or 120 Western planes. And you have, Europe has enough planes, it has more than 1,000, so 10% of it just investing into European security is quite easy. So Ukraine is able to move our anti-aircraft rockets and stuff closer to the front line, together with our planes. And then we'll have viable possibility to throw Russians away from our territory. And that would, if that would happen, it would definitely end in feeling of defeat for Russian people. And as we know from history, every time Russia is defeated on the battlefield, there is a change of regime. But far as I know, and as much as I like this project, it started. And we heard from Starmer, boots on the ground and wings in the sky. They started backing off. I heard it because of American pressure. What do you think about it?
Well, I think there was never any prospect. The initiative is that you've described is a very attractive one. And I've always wondered why, Western countries didn't go for it early on in the war. I think, in the
2022.
the close the sky, there was a strong, particularly after the first few months when the Russian Air Force stopped flying over Ukrainian airspace, when there was a clear humanitarian need, when essentially you have like missile, you have cruise and ballistic missiles and drones, especially when the air defenses were not quite so sophisticated. It would have been quite easy to have a sort of, Western jets air policing in the west of Ukraine. The reality has been there's zero political appetite from anybody to do that whilst there's active hostilities, and that of course creates an incentive for Putin to carry on with the war.
Carry on and on.
There is, I think, on the positive side, there is talk of doing something like this if we get a sustainable ceasefire, whatever that may be, or something else.
It would never happen, as we know.
Well,
as we can predict.
Sure. So you have a problem, right? You have a problem, which is the West to say, we'll do this if we get this ceasefire, and the advocates of the initiative would say, hey, you could do this now, and this will be quite a good idea. And of course,
to enforce the ceasefire, basically.
Yeah, and the classic objections that are put up are things like, well, it might mean Western jets would go head-to-head with Russian jets, but the Russian jets don't fly over Ukrainian airspace anyway because they don't want to be shot. They're fearful of being shot down. And the proposal you described, there's a very big, I think it's all essentially west of the Dnipro River, isn't it? So again, the line of contact is a long way east, as we all know. So again, you're not talking about these kind of dangers, aren't there? It's a frustrating position. So what's behind it? And to your question, well, I don't know, but nothing in the end, in the way things have been, and certainly were before Trump, nothing in the sort of Western military sphere happened unless the Americans wanted to happen, and essentially American policy dictated everyone else's policy. So the only reasonable conclusion is, and going back a bit to what we were talking about earlier, is the Americans don't want it. The Americans didn't want it.
But then Americans said loud and clear, Europe, forget about us. We won't be your security umbrella. We're looking at the blue waters of the Pacific, and that's our area of interest. And we don't give a damn about European security. And there were some conversation. Trump said that we'll think that maybe we won't protect the NATO countries who spend less money. So he put that famous fifth chapter under question, and Europe doesn't feel that secure. So that collective hallucination that we're protected by Americans is over. And besides, speaking of UK, you had first ever in the world nuclear terrorism when they poisoned one of their own with polonium.
Yeah.
Then you had first ever chemical weapon terrorism with Novichok. And I do believe that you understand what Russia is almost as much as Poles or Baltics who were under Russia heel, right? And you know that America stopped being reliable ally. So maybe we should work on this together.
Well, that's what's so interesting about this current moment, which is on the face of it, there's an opportunity which could be grabbed. There is an opportunity, which is, as you say, if America says, look, guys, we're out of Europe, you carry on, collective security is going to be increasingly for you, or, guys, we're getting out of Europe gradually, so you take it on. And then at that point, what you might want Europe to do, and Europe's been doing to some extent, but not quite enough, not quite grabbing the moment, which is to say, okay, yeah, we'll do it. All right, we get it. We get that. We've got the message. We're going to take responsibility for Ukraine.
Look over, where is danger in our backyard? It's
but you have two things are holding that back. It seems one of which is that I think Trump hasn't been in power that long. We're still in a kind of shock. The reflex is still America is out there. We need to keep America. in Europe to some extent. We don't want like some high-speed withdrawal that might leave us more exposed. And in particular, that reflex is very, very strong in Britain. And whatever you might think and whatever pressure gets put, whatever noise there is from opposition politicians or external politicians, the government of the day always comes up with the same conclusion, which is that Britain needs to be a bridge between the US and Europe, which is, well,
Then America already said, they made it clear that you're not the special ally.
I take the point. I mean, our geography tells you that that is the right strategy, and the long run of culture and history tells you the right strategy. But clearly, in this moment in time, with Trump as president, this is going to become under massive strain. Although, interestingly, Trump's picked a lot of fights, a lot of people. Keir Starmer is not his kind of politician, center-left lawyer, quite process-oriented, and so on and so forth. But Trump has really not picked a fight with the UK thus far. I can't believe it won't last, but he hasn't. So again, Britain will do everything it can to kind of keep the US in Europe. There's a second reason, though. And the second reason has got to be really the US itself, which is, can the US really... Trump might say, let's get out. And his minions might say, in the administration might say, let's get out.
They can do it today.
But
or tomorrow.
Do they really want to? Do they really want to see Europe make a success of its collective defense? And can they not resist? There's still lots and lots of levers of US power, US military power that exist, at the moment that give them leverage in the continent. For example, and we've seen this in the context of Ukraine, real time, US intelligence, the things that tell you when, the missiles are being launched, the jets are taking off, the things that make sure that a British missile like Storm Shadow, when fired by the Ukrainians, lands in just the right place. The technology that ensures that the the cabs don't land on the front line in quite the way they used to, and they have this kind of, and those are just a few examples, but they have this technical, military intelligence leverage all around the system, which is years and years of America spending money and Europe not spending enough money. And one could think of dozens of examples. And I think that the US has the capacity at the moment, and will have for a long time, to just like pull the lead of the dog and say, yeah, we say we want you to go alone, but we kind of want you to be dependent on us. And I think that's the idea. Yeah. And this is what makes this moment so interesting, which is how far are European leaders willing to take a leap forward and go, we hear what you say about European security, and now we're going to deliver it. We're actually going to take up a lot of responsibility for it. And how much the Americans are going to go, well, hang on a minute, we're the top dog, are they going to just pull the lead a bit and make it a little bit difficult? And these kind of tensions, go on. And if you're a politician like Donald Trump, I was speaking to a senior former, British politician who was a conservative in the former government and privately, and they just said, look, what's the one thing that Donald Trump hates? It's a party that he's not invited to, and their argument was, well, if Europe can make a success of this, then suddenly that's the thing that will bring America back. If Europe can be shown to make a success of it, so. I think if you're into geopolitics, this is the most fascinating and delicate time. And Ukraine, unfortunately for Ukraine, in many ways, but Ukraine sits right in the middle of that, and it's going to be the test case.
That's our karma, to be in the middle of every possible war in the last at least 100 years. But if you look into history, for a bit even longer, but what if I've spoken with people from intelligence, and they said that five eyes programs, it will take some time, but it will strategically it'll be quite okay with just 4 eyes without America. And the only thing that Europe cannot do is rockets for Patriot. The rest you can. So if they are busy with that Pacific region, Asia, Latin America, then we can do it together, I believe. Besides, you had that two poisonings in London, in the center of your capital, and then you had the problem with Heathrow, where somehow electricity was off, and the backline of electricity was somehow off, and I read its preliminary result, but preliminary result says it happened on its own. I love that preliminary thing. It's like the court is haven't seen the case, but preliminary, that guy is the killer. It doesn't work like that, right? What if you... Well, I do believe that it was done by Russia, because everything bad in the world,
in the UK.
Russians behind it. So would British government be ready to admit that it was an act of war?
So I haven't seen, for me, the Heathrow example is not the example to go for, but I understand why you raise it. And I think what was interesting was immediately my phone was kind of buzzing, mostly from colleagues at The Guardian. It was like, fire in Heathrow, fire in the substation, Heathrow knocked out. Was it the Russians? Was it the Russians? And there might have been a time 20 years ago when people said, would it have been, the IRA, Irish Republican terrorists? And now people say, was it the Russians? In this case, the police investigators have found, when the police investigators say they find nothing, they generally mean it. And what we understand, colleagues of mine who are close to the police, what they understand is, look, they've looked at the CCTV, they've looked at, there's no evidence there's no open gate, there's no evidence of intrusion, there's no sign of drones, etc., etc. So, the facts can change, but those are the facts. So I think for me, Heathrow isn't quite the example, but there are other recent, there's one example which we're still, I think, now we're going to wait till it comes to court, where this boat drove into an oil tanker in the North Sea. What was in the oil tanker? American aviation fuel. The oil tanker
was behind the
well, it was a Russian national who was driving, who was piloting the boat. The boat which just went in a straight line and drove into it. So again, we wait to see where that investigation goes, but. Look, that clearly looks different, and we've seen a number of incidents. That case will go through the British courts, but we have seen other incidents where of provocations, incidents
acts of terror.
In the Baltic Sea again, where where we've seen sort of electricity cables, internet cables being cut, boats dragging their anchors, and this sort of thing. Again. All very sort of grey zone activity, quite hard to work out exactly what's going on.
Cybercrime, then they hire criminals to do some firebombing and beating people up and killing people, and that was proven. But what it would take for Britain to say, no, that was an act of war from Russia's side.
I think that the question here is that politicians always will be slow to reach those kind of conclusions. But I think that, and the Russians know this too. I think you were talking about something that would be, it would definitely be a mass casualty event. So lots of people, being killed or injured. It could be but it could be a small number of people. I mean, the two. The climate has changed dramatically, and Britain has been historically, even when you talk about the Litvinenko poisoning, which is like something like 20 years ago now, and then the more recent poisoning of the Skripals in Salisbury, which is 2018. Even then, although again there were that prompted, diplomatic conflict between Britain and Moscow. In the case of the Skripals, they kicked out all the spies and asked other countries to do the same. But that was as far. It was definitely a point of conflict, and the relationship got worse. But it was not like a sort of a final point. So I think you're talking about some horrible nightmare scenario where lives are lost. But I think if you went and had a conversation with some people in the intelligence community and the armed forces, they'll say to you, not that Britain is at war with Russia, but that there's certainly a kind of a low intensity conflict that has some other kind of qualities of.
So they have gradations. right?
Yeah.
So what, where you are with Russia, what color it is, or what letter, I don't know. It's A, B, C, D, F, what is...
Well, I think what you got to understand is that I think they think that they're at war with us and the collective West.
Absolutely.
I think they think that. And we saw, I actually spent a lot of time earlier this year covering a spy trial in the Old Bailey, Britain's most famous criminal court. And in the end, there was a spy ring of Bulgarians based in the UK. One or two of whom were one of whom was quite sophisticated and recruited by Jan Marsalek, fugitive on the run from Germany, accused of being behind the €2 billion Wirecard fraud, and now directing from Moscow, directing operations of a Bulgarian guy who in turn had this sort of network of 4 or 5 others, some of whom really didn't know much. One of whom was a beautician, another guy was a painter and decorator. But they were going around the UK and Europe. They were following investigative journalists like this famous, well-known journalist Christo Grozev, following around Europe.
With intention to kidnap or kill him.
That's what they were talking about in the background. They didn't do those things, but when you surveil somebody like as intensively they did, they followed Grozev in his native Bulgaria, in Vienna where he lived, in Valencia where he was going to a conference. When you do that and you build up all this information about somebody, and then somebody wants to give the order from Moscow, move in, let's get this guy, then you've got the information you need. You know where he lives, or you know what his habits are, or you know what time of day he has breakfast. At one point they were following him. So these kind of things are going on. So I think that Britain and British people, we must not be naive about Russia. And I think in the past, before 22, we were often naive about Russia. They want to harass, intimidate, destabilize, acts of sabotage, cause all sorts of problems. What they, I think, scared of doing, and what they haven't done, is do that kind of major event that would lead to a loss of life.
Not to go to the red, to the red zone. But at the same time, Russian plays being watched by London public, and Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and all that great Russian culture is being read, and I saw it in bookshops around UK, and it's considered to be okay. We in Ukraine, we know that when Russian culture comes, after it, Russian tanks come. And as Surkov, one of Kremlin ideologists, said loud and clear in his recent interview, Russia interest is where people speak Russian. And in London, you have 250,000 Russians just in London.
Yeah. I don't know the figure, but there are plenty of Russians in London,
Yeah, it's quite a lot. So what if tomorrow they would decide that they need Knightsbridge People Republic, or they would need municipal house to switch into Russian as well, because otherwise their rights to be informed in their native language is suffering.
Yeah, look. You make a playful point, and who knows for sure. I would say though that Russia is not. You say that Dostoevsky's in the bookshops, and I'm sure he is, and I don't have a problem with that. But I don't think if you went into a bar and someone said, "Where are you from?" and like I'm from Russia, and British people would be kind of like, "Okay, what's your story?" nervously, and it's not, people. Russia is like really, Russia and its current leadership are really, really unpopular in the UK, and Britain is not a country like some countries in Europe where there's maybe 5, 10, 20% of people who are much more sort of, Russia sympathetic, or think, Moscow's got a point of view that's worth listening to. In the UK, it's much more like 1, 2, 3%, right? So this is not, Russia maybe some parts of Russian history or literature or things that are old that I know you have a different view on Ukraine, people are more relaxed about. But no one is sitting there and going, I find Russian culture admirable or attractive or anything like that. So I think I would certainly caution you on that. Interesting, a lot of the Russians that come to the UK, I mean, they come as much to escape, frankly. Put their kids into the sort of fancy fee-paying schools around London. It's a great business for those schools, and suddenly
infiltrate British society.
Yeah, and they produce second-generation kids with accents more like mine, more like mine, who, for all we know, may barely go back actually.
Absolutely, and they can. Shape in a couple of generations, they can shape British policy because, well, we know about Russian sleeper agents in America because they were uncovered, and I surely don't have ones in UK.
Look, we know the Russians love. This is an old Russian game that they love. I think what is true though is that the Russians have been less successful. I think that kind of the 20 years of Russians in London have been generally less successful in terms of. Russian economic influence in the UK is limited really to areas like sort of certain bits of the city of London. They're slightly grayer areas. Offshore finance, law firms. Of course, the Russians love suing each other, and sometimes they would sue British journalists too. Law firms, and these are the kind of people and other professional services. Yeah, real estate, accountants.
A lot of real estate.
These guys did very well out of Russian money, for sure. But what they didn't do is they didn't buy into industrial businesses. They didn't have any great leverage over British society in that respect. The one investment that was successful, the one thing they did do well, was they bought Chelsea Football Club, of course, and Roman Abramovich was the boss there. And Chelsea Football Club was run very effectively, and there was their one soft power success, actually. And of course, Abramovich was forced out. He was forced to sell after the full-scale invasion. Although, interestingly, and this is in a classic kind of Russian and London scenario, the £2.5 billion that was raised and was supposed to be given to Ukraine is still the subject of contested legal action and is stuck and blocked. And, nothing, that money hasn't been used. But that was the one soft power success they had for their 20 years. So I think their return has actually been pretty poor. But sure, by number and in certain parts of the economy, yes, the Russians are there. So maybe that will be a point of leverage. But I can't emphasize enough. I think the Russian stock in the UK is, as we might say, in the toilet in the kind of simplest way. And this is not and in that sense, I think. And what Ukraine can take comfort from is culturally as well as politically, there is a strong alignment, and that's not what you're seeing in the US.
Yeah, that's because what we see in the US is, well, at least from Ukraine, it looks catastrophic. And I know that in European capitals people are lost. I had a conversation with a friend who said, before I was waking up at 4 past midnight to watch what is the vector of the rockets that fly to Ukraine. Now I wake up to read what Trump wrote in his ramblings, or his cronies. So, Europe is worried about America, and it's right. But I do think that you're not worrying about Russians enough, to be honest. Because in 2022, I didn't believe they would start until the last second, until I heard rockets, because that would be stupid from military, political point of view. It was just stupid, and we had a discussion with a friend how we missed it, because it's beyond politics and military knowledge. It's into psychological, maybe psychiatrical. But don't you think that you're missing some viable threats from that side? I think you I think your argument is persuasive, and I think that you are right that in general terms, I think generally, I think
and I've sometimes had this actually as a journalist, where you've had a story that you've said, look, that this is, the Russians were behind this, or we should be suspicious, and colleagues who don't deal with Russia file so much and deal with the horrendous things are going, well, that sounds, are you sure? Are you being reasonable? That seems a little bit forced. And British people have this great expectation that in the end, people in authority or people behave reasonably, or the system will behave reasonably, and that people won't push things to the sort of nth degree, to the unlimited degree, or to do so would be a kind of is dictatorial or authoritarian. And yet, of course, we've seen that's Russian behavior. We've seen that actually with Donald Trump in a different way, and Republicans, suddenly push conventions to the limits, or patterns and norms of behavior to the limit. So going back to what you say, yeah, for sure. And I was one of those people who also didn't think that Putin would invade until the very last moment. And I've written about this. I was some men and women in dark glasses took me to one side and said a few days before, Dan, he's going to do it. And I said to them, no, he's not. No, he's not. And they said, why do you think that? And I sort of said, well, it's kind of crazy in the modern era,
Absolutely.
right? He would fake it. He would use it as a point of pressure, but he wouldn't do it. And they said, listen, we have information you don't, and you need to take it seriously. So, the Western intelligence got that right unlike in Iraq, of course, they got that right in the run up to the conflict. So yes, have we been guilty of underestimating Russian intentions, the reality of Russian thinking, the desire of Russia to invade, to poison, to sabotage, to cause havoc? Yes, we have. So that doesn't take you to the brightest of futures. I think finally the penny has begun to drop, that we're just, in the UK and Europe, we are going to have to spend more on defense. We're going to have to spend more on intelligence. We're going to have to kind of deal with the reality of a kind of hostile country in the East, and a hostile country that whatever happens in Ukraine isn't going to go away. So we've begun to wake up to that. But I think that, the problem we have, we're not going to have this regime change in Russia. I don't think Russia is anywhere near the point of collapse, and is not going to be made to, that's not going to happen on the battlefield. The problem we've got is that they're going to sit there and take everything they've got as a win. That's their mindset, and kind of go, and how can we cause more trouble? And what else can we do? And how can we up it one notch, and then maybe one more notch? And that's not a very attractive prospect.
Absolutely, because that's classical story how you boil the frog slowly.
Yeah.
And it's still okay. It's minor threat, and we sent away some spies. It wasn't pleasant, and we sent away some Russian diplomats. That was not nice. So we made Abramovich to sell football team. But then it goes up and up and up and up. And maybe it's time to do something about it. Anyway, this week at the end of this week, you're going to the front line, as you usually do. Do you know which regiment would you visit, or it's not?
I shouldn't be too detailed, although I can also say that these things have a habit of coming together at the last minute. So I'm not sure I've got any great secrets to reveal. I think, well, I don't want to say too much about this, but I think where is the fighting the hottest? I think still around Kursk and Sumy and in various parts of the east. So these are the
oblast of Russia, maybe.
So these are the kind of places that I would look at. And when I come here, and I come on rotation with several other Guardian colleagues, and I've been here. This is my 10th time here. I generally come here for about 3 weeks. So you could go figure it. One comes to Kyiv like I am now, and try and figure out a plan, and then we go on. We go on the road. One might have a week or so to play with, and then you come back and consolidate. So. You can, much as I'd love to go around the whole country, you have to pick, such as the size of Ukraine, you have to pick if you want to go perhaps to the south or the east. And generally I've gone to the east, where I really know things, and I have been to. Previously, I was in Sumi in August, so if I go up there, I'll have, when I was in August, of course, it's just after the start of the Kursk incursion and the forces are pushing forward. So I think the mood will be very different, so I've got something really to compare it to. I was also in Pokrovsk, actually, I think, in Pokrov city when they were packing up in August. So again, I know that area, so I've got a previous to compare it to. So these kind of things, this gives you an advantage, just sort of going back and going back.
Would be very interesting to talk with you when you come back, because you come regularly and you notice the changes in the mood and stuff. So let's do that.
I'd be delighted.
And it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us. And please say our thanks to Downing Street, Dan, as well.
Well, I'll try to pass on the message, although I don't know how. Maybe I'll have to post it through the door. Look, thank you for having me. And I always appreciate my conversations with you, and I've enjoyed chatting to you. And I just, it's always great to come here to Ukraine. It is at my job is like the sort of the hard geopolitics, and this is this for me is the fulcrum of that. So it's a fascinating place to be, and I really enjoy coming here because the stories you can tell.
Thank you. Cheers,
Thank you.
mate.